Well, welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisin, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And today we have Elisa Stancil Levine on, and the book is This or Something Better. You can actually see it on her screen better than mine. Mine's just a little book. And you're joining us from where this morning, Elisa?
I'm outside of Sonoma, in Sonoma County, actually a little town of Glen Ellen, on a mountain, looking at turkeys running through the fields outside my window. It's very
It,
quiet out
a
here.
very beautiful place. You're in a very rural place. And this memoir, she and I were just speaking, is a memoir of resilience. And that's the subtitle on here, This or Something Better. And it really is about how do we get to something better. And I'm going to let the listeners know a little bit about you. Elisa is spent her childhood in a canyon on the American River, upstream from the site of the California Gold Rush. She left school at 16 as a single mother in Sacramento, earned a degree in library science, and studied creative writing. Worked with partners, she remodeled 16 historic homes and was home and gardener editor and feature writer in the Sacramento magazine. At 36, she founded Stancil Studios, an award-winning nationwide decorative finishes company in San Francisco. This memoir shares the story of making a maker and takes place in Northern California, Manhattan, and Paris. When Elisa is not writing, traveling, or consulting on color and patterns, she and her husband, Chuck, spend hours immersed in nature, running and riding horseback in Sonoma Mountains. This or Something Better is her second book. Her essays have appeared in Entropy Magazine, Stirring a Literary Review, the Penman Review, and the Writer's Workshop Review. And she says a third book is in the works. Well, third one can always be the best. It could be the best. I know lots of writers, it takes 8 or 10 books for them to get to the best one. But, it's an inspiring personal memoir. It's also filled with these kind of, I'm just going to call them crazy yet harrowing stories in them. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to share so personal and upfront your story. Memoir is always personal, and sometimes people don't want to tell that personal of the story, but you have done so. Why were you inspired to do this?
Well, Greg, really, from the time I was really little, I realized, I felt I had been born wise, and I'm looking around with my panoramic vision and thinking, this is not exactly, some of these people don't seem to know what I seem to know. So it was really my very first memory that triggered my desire to finally write about everything that I had collected visually. I'm super visual. So this very first memory was when I felt totally embraced and recognized in nature. And that was really my very first memory. So this imprinting of nature bridged all the gaps that seemed to be there, or seemed to bridge all the gaps that were in my human interactions. So it was, yay, I was so happy. I thought I had solved my problem, people not trustworthy, nature all for me, yay, done. And I progressed through my life always intending to write about that, and how, lucky that made me under the circumstances, which we'll probably talk about a little bit. But in fact, when I went to write it, okay, finally I'm retired, yay, everything's fine, I'm going to write. The first 20 years of my life were traumatic, but they were distant by the time I'm writing, right? I'm like 60 now or 65, so yeah. And the last 20 years were all great. So no problem. But what about the middle? Okay, I
That
didn't
in
want to write
between
about that.
period.
Yeah, this is what they call the second act. I mean, in everybody's life, things come up. There's, things get messy, okay? And it shows up in, let's say it's Shakespeare's plays or anybody else's writing. You find out, what actually.
Well, for you, it's certainly the hero's journey, right? You go out, you've had all these experiences. And, you have a picture on the front of this book as, you can see the fire in the bottom, you can see the smoke, and then you can see the clouds. And I think that is very symbolic of what you're talking about. And you start off the book with this, I'm going to call it harrowing experience, with this raging fire coming toward you. You say you get out of bed, you're completely naked, you're standing there in the window, and you see these flames coming over the hill. And you and Chuck are deciding to leave the ranch. And, you know, Chuck says to you with a better sense, oh, why don't you be the one that guides this, right? And while preparing to try and get your horses off the property, one of them needed to be sedated, but you couldn't find anything to sedate him with. Then you took these markers and you tried to mark on the back of the horses a phone number, the cell number, I guess, for Chuck, but you couldn't do that because the markers were dry. You tell the story and your thoughts about leaving and not warning others, because this is a key point. It's the last statement in the chapter there, that opening chapter, and why this was so important to you.
This has really been an interesting thing. All the people that have read the book have come to my readings and all that. But some of them feel really sympathetic and feel sorry for me and try to explain to me that I don't have to feel bad. But I'm telling you, this was a signal to me, a huge signal. Listen, you know, I'm not who I think I am. I think I'm this warm person with, you know, lots of care, and I'm going to help people and do all these great things. But in fact, no, I zoomed away on my own without even looking to the left or the right on our little mountain road. There's one way out. And yes, everybody would be running and trying to save themselves. This is understood. But the fact that I didn't even think of it was a sign to me that there were things that have not been resolved from my early childhood. And, you know, this was, you know, I had at 70 or 73 now, I have 20 years to resolve this. I'm giving myself. I need to look deeply at how I relate to others, and whether or not all this woo-woo that I have in my life that is so loving, right, is really being applied, or if I'm still armored. And the question was, where did this armor come from that causes me to have this defense? And did nature itself inspire me to learn how to melt my own armor through this fire? I mean, it's not like the fire was given to me through God because of, and I needed to know this. The fire just was. But what can I do with this fire? It's not any different than what can I do with a grandmother that's so cruel? What can I do with any of these things that seem almost impossible to realize what I
Well,
could
do you
do?
think that that defense mechanism, in other words, survival of self, obviously maybe was tied up in many of the things from your prior life? And, you know, the book explores a number of these different themes and experiences, including one, surrendering to kind of universal self-love healing. And you share this personal experience in the book. This story was particularly transformative for you. And and if you could speak about your grandmother, and she called you a murderer, which was because of your Catholic background, right? In other words, she was saying, hey, for her, it just seemed kind of odd to me that she would call a young girl a murderer. There had to have been something mentally challenging with her to do something like that. And then those crazy, what do you want to call them, cleansing baths that you had to take. I mean, you read this book and you're kind of like, were these people crazy?
Well, what was so bizarre is that in the community where she was living, which was another sort of mountain community, 10 minutes or so away from my parents' house, who were, you know, anyway, so grandma was this person I preferred to spend time at my grandmother's house. Question mark. Why would that be if she's going to be doing these things? Well, she didn't do these things all the time. And she was very definite and adamant and convincing about everything. Her perspective was very strong. And she, part of her perspective as a Seventh-day Adventist, she had converted earlier in her life. And so somehow she just had to accuse me, the only one that she accused of being a murderer. I'm the only girl. My mother was a Catholic. So I married my grandmother. I mean, my mother married my grandmother's son. And so this was both of her sons married Catholics. But I don't know what she did to anybody else. It was just me. She just had, maybe because I was durable and kind of on the lookout, she just wanted to somehow straighten me out and, blame me. And like I said, somehow I knew whatever it was, it was soothing to her. And it wasn't anything I could prevent. I mean, I just couldn't prevent it. She would do it. And then I would go upstairs and dress, and then I would pretend like it never happened. And this, I would say probably happened 20 times, 30 times from the time I'm 2.5. And maybe she was aware that my step grandfather was sexualizing all of us little girls. Maybe she was secretly aware and subconsciously aware of that, and was, I don't know. I mean, I could go all day on trying to analyze my grandmother.
Well, actually talk about that, because, I just recently had a woman on here, and it's called Under the Orange Blossoms. And her defense was, and I'm not here to speak about her book, but I found it so compelling because in the later years, she had to take care of her father. And her father was the molester. He was a pedophile. And he literally not only was molesting her, but he was molesting other kids in the neighborhood as well.
Yeah.
But in the end, if you go to her website, she did interviews with her dad. Now, he was German and he still had a strong accent, but during the interviews, he could not look at her. She would ask the questions and his eyes would shut, and he would go into this banter about, she would ask him why he did it. And he said, because you were blossoming. Right. And
this is
it
exactly
was
what I say because I was molested a number of other little examples of times. And the thing is that I decided that I had the light of life. And this is why my grandfather was doing this. And he wanted to connect to the light of life, whether it was me or my other two grandparents.
That's the same thing this guy kind of said. Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, but it's not it's not my fault that I have the light of life. I already know I'm blessed by God, right? Here, look at, the minute I got here, it was just blessed. So yeah, I just have to keep moving, right? Yeah. This was my answer to the solution, was just keep moving, Yeah. I'm not going to make myself different, I mean,
well, from what age to what age did that actually happen? In her case, she was young. She was from 5 to 10 years old. He molested her.
Well, as it shows I think it's the 3rd chapter or something, from the time I was about 1.5 years until I started to really talk at about almost 3, I was the one that he would take to the woodshed, that he would take to the garage. We would go together, and it was always when Grandma was at the at church.
Yeah.
So there was other kids around, but they were just doing whatever, because kids used to be able to do whatever they wanted. They were out playing. And I was with Grandpa. I was special, right? And so I had no idea. I knew that I felt comforted and safe when he would do this whole cunnilingus thing with me, right? But I was just a little child. It's described in there sensitively, and I hope I'm not triggering anybody by talking about this so plainly. But I tried to write it like I felt it at the time, which was just, oh, I'm special, and we're having this time, and then we come out, and then everything's fine. And then when he stopped wanting to be with me and started taking my little cousin, I felt totally abandoned. And I started thinking, okay, that's strange, that now that, okay. And he would just walk away. He was pretty deaf, and he was always making this mumbly humming sound and stuff. And they would just be walking away to where we used to go. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's done then. And, meanwhile, here's Grandma with the scrubbing. And so, yeah, it's just
interesting. Many of these call them pedophiles, because it looks like your grandfather did the same thing that this man did to her and other children. It was like more than one different children. Some of them, many of them not related. In other words, kids in the neighborhood that he befriended, and then you know, did whatever he did do. In your case, now your grandfather chooses somebody else and you feel kind of rejected because you're so young, you don't really understand these things. But it made it certainly made an indelible imprint, because while those memories aren't there, in Cindy's case, she would start to have nightmares about it, right?
Mm.
Nightmares because she could remember. And you speak about the role of self-discovery and self-exploration have played in your personal journey. If others that are listening right now, knowing that, they've only listened to like 15 minutes so far, or 20 minutes of this podcast, and here's this woman on the other end with this memoir, and already we've talked about some pretty strange things that have happened to her, how would you help them deal with the difficult, painful experiences, the trauma, the loss? Um, how would you tell them to find strength to persevere through these challenges? And then what would you tell them to explore to learn as a result of it?
I really do believe one of the most important things is the tenderness that you can extend to yourself as you begin to explore, or realize, or even question your early life or other times in your life when you were not in control and things did not go in a way that was healthy for you. Okay, so if you are grappling with this and there's anger, pain, and resentment, of course, but that's a reaction. The very thing that is really so required is the tenderness you can extend to yourself as you face these things, because this is the very thing that was missing. And this is parenting yourself, loving yourself. And I'm not saying that this is an answer or makes the pain different or go away, but it is a little kind of a North Star, better than the concern that people have sometimes that they're going to tumble into a black hole and it's going to
Well,
be.
you explore forgiveness, and both for oneself and for others. I believe forgiveness is so important. Self-forgiveness is really important, because you didn't actually intentionally put yourself in that situation with your grandfather. So speak with us about that, because we do see examples of it many times, like it always kind of strikes me. I'm in kind of awe when somebody goes into court and the family of somebody who murdered someone else in their own family says, okay, we give you forgiveness, because they know that if they carry around that grudge, the only person it's really hurting is themselves. But that's a very spiritual thing, isn't it?
Sometimes sometimes forgiveness can be sort of like counting coup, like, ha ha, I'm better than you, I have forgiven you. That
Mhm.
doesn't, I'm not saying that that's not forgiveness, but there is some process in my experience of having to come to terms with certain things that happened and then wait. And certainly with my grandmother, my grandfather killed himself. Okay. So there's that. And my grandmother, and this is a step grandfather. So this step grandfather, she married when he was like 65. So he's gone, he's out of the picture. Fine. And then my grandmother, the reason he killed himself is that my grandmother had a stroke and she wasn't anything like she was before. She had no confidence. She was totally, heartbroken to be so unable, and she was paralyzed on one side, and she ended up living for 20 plus years in a convalescent home, not with her children, and this is a long arc that happens in life sometimes. And all I knew was that she would value that I would come and visit, and I would take her out. We would go to a Chinese restaurant, and with a wheelchair, and my son, who was 12 at the time, and I would give her massage her hand that was paralyzed, and give her a manicure, and like that. So there's no reason not to do that, in my opinion, even after it pretty fresh after leaving home. there was every reason to do it, because I could then say, look, I am not a murderer, right? I didn't have to say it. And it probably was about 15 years into her arc of being paralyzed, and I had brought her down to my house here in Sonoma, and we had a 3 or 4 date thing. Anyway, in that moment, finally she said, the world lost a good nurse when you became an artist. Now, this phrase, this whole little sentence to me meant, I know you're not a murderer. I know I also credit you for being an artist, and I thank you for being so loving to me. That's what I took from that, and that's just how I try to work it out. So in terms of how people can find a space for forgiveness for others, I think it's a process. It's not an instant idea that this will be good or this will make it less painful. It's
Yeah,
more.
you in this case with your grandmother, obviously after her stroke, you were doing some caring for her, and in the process, the exploration, she was saying things which I would say probably made a lot more sense than when she was talking to you saying you were a murderer, right? Which I would think that would leave a pretty indelible implant. And the book discusses vulnerability and authenticity in relationships. Um, how have you cultivated these qualities in your own life? And, I know Brene Brown speaks a tremendous amount about vulnerability. Um, and I think what she has to say about it is so important, whether you're in your personal life or your business life, because we have a lot of business people that listen to this show as well. And you're a businesswoman, you're a very astute businesswoman. And you work with some very high-end clients, right? And I think uh, one, having the vulnerability to actually say or admit you're wrong when you're wrong, that you oh, I see your viewpoint, I see your side of this, is really important. And what has it done to help you, that and authenticity, in helping you with relationships both in your personal life and obviously doing what you do in the art world as well?
Well, I have to say one thing that I confess is that I've studied a bunch of different ideas about vulnerability and about authenticity and intimacy, this idea of intimacy. And with my personal relationship, I finally told my husband, who's my fourth husband, okay, and I was divorced 3 times by the time I was 27. So obviously I wasn't really doing
Well,
a
you
good job.
started young.
Started very young, and each relationship got better, Greg. Okay, so yay, I can point to that. But
Yeah.
no, here, here we had started dating, and I was just trying to lecture him, kindly help him with ideas about intimacy. And finally, I guess it was like 15 years later, I said, I don't know shit about intimacy. I really don't. I know what it's supposed to look like. I know what it sounds like. I know how to make it, cobble it together for a minute. That doesn't mean that I know anything about it. And this was the thing, is beginning to understand that it's okay to not know, and it's okay to share that unknowing is part of what really came from my writing career. When I was trying to do articles about things I knew nothing about, I was assigned them, and I would get all anxious and upset because I didn't know everything. Well, guess what? Of course I don't know everything. And the same thing with collaborative work in decorating, and working with the client and the decorator, the architect, and the builder. This collaborative experience, you're not expected to know everything, but there are things that we can feel intuitively and
Ah,
strength, and
that's a
really,
key.
and bring to the party that has value. And it's the same thing for these others. So it's more, the collaboration really helped me a lot. But when it's just one-on-one, it just sometimes just get really confounded. And I don't know if that's still just old stuff. Believe me, I had therapy and still have a wonderful therapist I can check in with, which I do, and there's a lot that we all can do to help ourselves. But in fact, one of the things that was a little bit of a problem for me is wanting to be right and being okay and being fine and being strong. And that's part of that armor, and it's not part of vulnerability, right?
Do you think that in that process of, even though you were very young, what your grandfather did to you, no matter what those memories might have been, that, you know, you look at 4 marriages, you look at intimate relationships, did that really affect your intimacy? Because, you know, I'm relating now to Cindy. And, you know, and I'll say this again because this interview was just so recent. You know, it's like, well, all the other girls told her, you know, a guy's foot size or hand size was good. You know, she even writes very openly about it, right? And it was like, and her having intimate relations with young men kind of at the first time after this thing with her father, right? Do you believe that those old wounds that you carried, that you maybe didn't even realize because you supplanted them into the subconscious, really affected your ability with intimacy and relationships?
Definitely, definitely. I was, again, like from the, I think in the second chapter, I just say by the time I was 3, I was on the lookout for who and what I could trust. And I
Right.
chose sunflowers, raspberries, my cousin Debbie. That's it. Right? You know, good stuff, and nothing
Yeah.
more. And so when with these men, and of course, many people who have been women, I'd say, but maybe perhaps also men who have been sexualized at a young age, they are very promiscuous without any thought of it being promiscuous, just like, well, what the hell, you know? And so here I was, and it was the beginning of, you know, no bra and, you know, free love. So what am I going to do? I'm just out and about. And like I've told people, I would go have, I would have sex with someone to find out if I wanted to have coffee with them, not
Mhm.
the other way around. Right? This
Right.
is whatever. But this was totally, there was no deep connection
Right.
at all. And it was also not, what do you call it, productive of sexual fulfillment either. It was just an action. A guy called it there in the book, counting coup, like, haha, you, whatever. And I would be walking down you know, at college, I'd think, oh, that person looks familiar. I wonder, and I could tell they were thinking, I wonder if I had sex with her. I'm thinking, I wonder if I already had sex with her. I mean, it's just like a lot of sex going on.
Yeah, you recount that in the book. Yeah. Yeah.
So, so this was not the way to get close.
So
And it
you
wasn't
said this or
until
something better. Maybe it was something better,
it
right?
was it was this. It was this and this and this and this and this. But something better finally came when I met my 4th husband. I mean, we dated for 20 years before we got married. And we
Wow.
lived on the opposite coast. So it took, you know, there was a lot to bring us together. And I just love him so much. And he's so consistent and he's so accepting. I mean, it's amazing. So, you know, I just really feel so blessed to have found him. And I did an affirmation and wrote my list, you know, from Shakti Gawain and, you know, creative visualization and from You Can Heal Your Life. And I wrote the list in a present tense. The man I choose to love is, you know, I just read this every day for like, I don't know, I think it was maybe a month.
Well,
And then
you know, you've been through so much change and uncertainty. I mean, you know, really, when you read this memoir and you look at, you know, the crazy baths and your grandmother being 7-day Adventist and calling you a murderer and you having all these sexual relationships and the fires that you've had and the things that you've dealt with, is it's truly a very full life. But if you're going to talk to the listeners about the importance of bracing change and uncertainty, share one of the personal experiences or a story that illustrates how you kind of navigated. So we're talking about you navigating change, and how others may want to look at uncertainty or change, because, you know, most people resist it. They go, I don't want to change. I mean, a perfect example of that is when you talk to people today about, just what happened, the coronation with
Mhm.
Charles. Like that's old school, right? Put on a
So,
crown and, and it's so old school, right? And you talk to people today and they'll say, wow, I don't even know why we're doing that anymore. Yet it hasn't changed in hundreds of years. They're still playing the same old stupid stuff, right? Pardon me for all the people that are British that still believe in that, but it's my own personal commentary.
yeah.
Yeah. How would you tell somebody to embrace change, embrace uncertainty, and actually learn? And what story would you like to relate with that? Because you've got so many in the book.
You sent me some great questions, and I did write something about that I could actually read. It would probably be more efficient to tell you answer this question by reading it, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, so early questioning about the power of adults and the importance I should place on their dictates helped me escape my family. But it did not guarantee that I would thrive and bloom, but rather simply remove myself from one dynamic to find myself lodged in another. Yet any setback, up until the death of my fiance, I believe myself strong enough to overcome, even including the death of my baby. But then I collapsed like a cheap umbrella, I swear. After that was just too much. That was it. And I bet you there's everybody that has had to be gritty and all that has things that were just too much.
Right.
Okay. Therapy was helpful, and I've had a long-time connection with an amazing behavioral therapist, but my own anger was key. If it mounted to a boiling point, I would realize I needed to make a change. So like in a marriage, suddenly I would just say, is this good enough? Is this really what I'm supposed to be doing here? Am I being my best self here? No? Okay, I'm out. Okay, out. O-U-T, out. Okay, so I tend not to blame others, but rather amend my own reality. I find that more efficient and effective. But that's still keeping the same behavior. I'm like the king's robes, right? I'm still doing the same thing. I think it looks different because it's a different setting. So this whole idea that whatever worked before is really working is a little suspect. And that one of the things that is true for me is I just like figuring stuff out. I just like it. I like wondering. So
Mhm.
I may be wondering about something 10 years ago and not applying it today, but however we're progressing through all this, whether it's the COVID crisis or anything else, I take things that I used to use or do and try to apply them to the new difficulty, and I think.
I was speaking with a doctor the other day that ended up, and this is relatable to what you're talking about. He went to India and all the ashrams and seeking enlightenment. So this is a true story. He goes there the first time and looks for all these gurus who have enlightenment. Goes the second time, goes the third time, finally finds a guru, and he says, I don't really see where there's so many of these people are just enlightened. And the guy says, well, what is your definition of enlightenment? And he says, well, it's supposed to be somebody that's calm and peaceful all the time and blissful and whatever. And he goes, well, I think you have your definition wrong, right? He said, enlightenment is really unconditional self-acceptance. And with that, he came back from India and he realized that it is unconditional self-acceptance is what actually in his world now creates enlightenment. What would you say about unconditional self-acceptance?
It's something I try to practice every day. It's like a constant, like little, I'm just like picking up the tab of the edge of it so often. And and then the times when I feel the most truly in that place, if I'm out running on the mountain, it's when I'm not there. I know I'm no longer this entity. I am
Uh-huh.
the essence of life, and when you have this, this beautiful experience of the essence of life and you are one with it, then this is just heavenly. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, there's, the monkey mind, there's all these other things that come into play, or just whatever you promised to do that day that you don't.
But the ego is so strong that, it wants to say to you, Elisa, I can't accept you for what this is. You're not good enough.
Right.
Right. So when you say unconditional self-acceptance, that's like no matter what happens, wherever it happens, however it happens, whatever memory you're taking from it, we're putting a judgment on it as to whether or not it's good or bad.
It seems
And that is the meme. That is the meme that's saying, hey, I call that bad. I call that good. Like with your grandfather. Most people say, well, there's a stigma. Your grandfather molested you. Now, if you really want to take it to the complete opposite side, maybe that experience was supposed to be
exactly
for unconditional self-acceptance. And that's what gives you the ability to get out of the pain.
Well,
I don't know how I've done this show now for 16 years and I've had all kinds of fascinating people like you on, and we get into these deep conversations. But let's talk about this idea of spiritual connection and faith, because it is this part. Look, whether Catholicism was the big deal, or Seventh-day Adventist was the big deal, or Judaism was whatever it is, that to me is religion. That's not spirituality.
Right.
Can you speak to us about the role that these have played, the spiritual connection in your faith and your personal journey, and how people listening on the other end of this right now can learn about how having more faith and having a connection to a higher spirit and getting in touch with their intuition can really transform their lives?
Well, that's a big question, Greg, but I can tell you that if I look at the whole progression of my experience with religion, Catholicism taught me how to edit a religion. There's a lot of things in there I could
Edit
not
it, yeah.
And I was very little, and I'm like, that can't be true. Even Mary couldn't even save her son, and she's standing there looking all glorious, and he's hanging on a cross. I mean, and okay, he was only hanging on this cross for supposedly 32 hours, and then all of us are supposed to look at that all day, every day, and feel bad. No, I'm not doing it. Okay, so then, Seventh-day Adventist. Okay, that they had some great ideas. They had this beautiful book called Happiness Homemade. And it was all about how you're going to, it was really beautifully inculcating the idea of the nurturance of a woman into the whole home life. Okay. And this was my grandmother's thing. I agreed with the book, but how she took it was not what I thought was right. Okay. Judaism later. Okay. Now I'm ready to really look. And here is a bunch of children at my husband's family at a table, and whenever they ever start to speak, everybody's quiet, like, oh wait, he's speaking. He's a whole person over there, this 4-year-old, right? Yay, let's listen. And then on top of that, editing anything that I thought was really just not really what I wanted. And then finally, just realizing that the reason I was really attracted to Judaism was because they have this whole thing called ethical values, and basing the religion supposedly bedrock on these ethical values I use it as a key to pattern design and all kinds of other things, and organizing principle for a lot of my work with other people. Just simply doing that. So yes, and a lot of the newer parts of Judaism, I just really don't care about, but I've now edited to what I care about, which is kind of pretty primitive. And I think that's probably the fact, is that I'm more primitive than I am anything else. So
but I think the basic principles of many faiths, of many, whether it's Catholicism, Judaism, Muslims, whatever, they're all leading toward the same thing, and that's a connection with a higher spirit. In essence, there's a lot of things, but Judaism, because that's my background. My mother was Jewish, so I'm Jewish. And there are fundamental principles, as you're talking about, which are really, really core rooted things that I think if our whole society actually believed in and worked on, we might have a more just and meaningful America. How's that? As I'm speaking with clients that are all the way across the world, and we talk about, things like shootings and, stuff like that. And we talk about homeless. They go, hey, we don't have one homeless person in Amsterdam. If they are, they're in being taken care of. And in the 9 years that this friend of mine's lived there, he hasn't known of any one person that had been killed by a gun. Right. So, you look at the fundamentals of how those fundamentals that you're talking about could be the basis, the underpinning basis of a society and a culture that could operate more justly and I would call sanely, then I would say you're right. Now, you share your personal experiences or stories, many of them in this book. It's weaved throughout the whole book in this memoir. What do you hope that the reader who picks up your memoir, and we're going to put a link to her website as well, and I will tell all my listeners that it's ElisaStancillevine.com. Go to there and you're going to learn more. You can read her blog as well. What do you want people to take away from this?
I think I was just trying to share the humor and the interesting perspective that you get over such a long period of time that ends up tying many of the things that seem totally unrelated together. And that as you make your way through this life, it's the thing, there's all these little keys that you pick up as you go, almost like an Alice in Wonderland type of story, where you are becoming more and more and more aware, or more and more able to cope, simply because of these innocent tiny keys that you have then observed and brought with you and find a place for. And it's a process. It's not, you're not doomed, made or broken or blessed by any one thing. You really, we're just in process.
Well, I like your quote on your blog, and it says, "This is this." And maybe we kind of sum it up like this: all that has been, all that will be, is held in the essence of each moment. Then and now, dark and light, these contrasts shape how we see. Only by looking deeper can we discover the ever-present suchness of life. These writings are my greeting to you and the light within you. And I actually think that that's a really good, that's very deep. It's very philosophical, but at the same point, when you take that little statement and you break it down, the part about then and now, dark and light, these contrast shapes how we see. Only by looking deeper can discover the ever-present suchness of life. I think it's always said, the darkness serves the light, right? You can't have the light without the darkness, right? And those are the polarities that we have in life. As an artist, I just saw something the other day around kindness, and the guy was sketching on the street, and he says, most artists, when they give them a canvas or a piece of paper, a lot of time they're frightened by it because it's like confined. It's like this square thing that I've got to do something in to make it. But yet when they went out on the street and they took chalk and they started doing chalk and images and creating out of pieces of gum that were actually on the street and going around it, they were able to create just such this beauty, right? And it was seeing in something that somebody else would step on or step over, the beauty in that, or the eyeball. I know he took two pieces of gum and the gum actually created eyeballs in the piece of the artwork, and I thought that was pretty cool.
And probably to him, it's like just sitting there looking at him, he knew that that's what he would do. It's like, it's just, these things just tell you what to do.
Right.
There's this intuition aspect. I'm sorry, I can't really help people understand it any more than just to try to listen. I mean, you can see, I mean, there'd be, I don't know, a little flower that's just saying hello, 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 hello. Or you walk out and, you know, a dog comes up and running to you and it smells totally of rosemary because it's been rolling around in this rosemary. And you're thinking, I didn't even know I had rosemary. What a lucky thing. I mean, there's just so many things that are beyond you can beyond planning, and that's why planning to be intuitive or something is like I don't know,
No, you can't do that. You can't plan to be intuitive, but you can plan to be this or something better. So,
right.
and I would highly recommend people go to Amazon and pick up a copy. We'll have a link there. Go to her website. There are blog
And they
posts
can
there
read
as well.
the whole first chapter on my website, and it's cute because it shows the pages turn. You can hear the pages turning as you're reading it, you know.
Yeah, but I
Great.
think, you know, if you're looking to get a kind of a unique perspective about how to view the world, Elisa's book is something that will do that for you. Granted, she used her stories and trials and tribulations to actually guide you and direct you there to get you there. But at the heart of it, it's a way for you to shift your perspective and for you to be more accepting and more kind to yourself, and for you to be more understanding of others, and for you to see the world in a new light. And I appreciate you for bringing not only your story to us, but also your memoir and all the stories that you tell throughout this book to help the readers understand that. And this is this. Any parting words?
I just want to thank you so much, Greg. I really loved this. And I loved hearing that read out loud about the blog quote. It is true. I mean, I really am joyful to be on the planet, and I love to share the things that I learn and see. And I welcome anybody to check out what is on my website. It would make me really happy. Thank you.
Oh, it's awesome. It's a koi pond. When you get there, people, there's a koi pond there. And underneath it is The Little Princess by Antoinette de Saint. How do you say her last name? Exprès?
And it's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry.
I don't
The Little
know who
Prince.
it is, but it's a
Oh, you
great
haven't
quote.
read? Oh, you
No,
haven't read The Little Prince?
nope. It does
Oh,
say it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. That kind of sums up what we're talking about here. It's great. Thanks so much, Elise. Appreciate you being on Inside Personal Growth and speaking with our listeners today about your new book called This or Something Better, a memoir of resilience. Definitely a resilient woman, folks.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Greg.
Namaste.
Namaste.